I was looking online, and I said, I want to get a healthy bulldog. So I ran across the Old English Bulldog, a healthier version. And a guy, I started Googling it, and a guy that lived, he lives in Emory. He's probably 100 miles, 120 miles from me here. He had a litter of gargoyle and of bloodlines, and I had been researching it a little bit, and the gargoyle is more of a working Old English Bulldog. And I thought, I'm going to contact him. So I contacted him, and he had a litter of, all of them were chocolate. And the mom was named Ruby Tuesday, and the daddy was D-Day's. I think D-Day's Getting Lucky. And he started showing me pictures of all of them, and most of them were sold. But I said, well, I'd like a male. So he was showing me pictures, and then he showed me one, and he goes, now this one you can have a little bit cheaper. And I said, well, why? He goes, it's fluffy, and I don't know why it's fluffy, and I don't know how it got fluffy. He goes, but the IOEBA made me DNA all the puppies, and they had to DNA Lucky that was in like another state, like Illinois or Iowa, somewhere, wherever D-Day was at that time, that kennel. They had to DNA the sire, and then he DNA'd the dam, because they said, oh, your dog must have got bred through the fence. He goes, I have kennels. There is no way any dog. Well, how did you breed her? Ship semen. They shipped you the wrong semen. So they swabbed all these dogs. I believe it was 13, 11 puppies in Siren Dam, and all of them came back that they were siblings out of that dam and sire. So I snagged up that Fluffy, and he was chocolate and white. His name was I named him Trucker, and God, that's the best dog I've ever owned. He just died 2 years ago
Mm.
of a tumor on his spleen, and they cut him open to remove the tumor, and it had already had some like feelers or roots, and it was coming off the spleen, and it had attached to the backside of the liver.
Mm.
And when they called me, they said, listen, we can remove the spleen because he doesn't need it, but where that's attached to the liver, we can cut it off, but this dog's going to be sick. He's going to be so sick that we just want you aware, if you keep him alive, that he's not going to feel good. And I said, just keep him asleep and just put him down, because he was my friend. And I said, I can't go around and him being sick. I mean, he was such. When I took him to the vet, even though he had that tumor, he walked right in, was just playing and hopping around. You never would have known he was sick. So I said, it's just best to put him to sleep. And I had him, I had him cremated, and then I brought him home, and I had a headstone out here in my yard, a real big headstone made for him. And because I went through hell with that dog, I would take him to all these dog shows, and people would laugh and say, no, he's not an Old English Bulldog. He looks like one, but he's not one because he's fluffy. I said, he is. He has a recessive gene. When they decided to bring in this color, they brought in the gene, and nobody knew. I mean, these people that were breeding these dogs, color meant money. Color meant you had color on your yard, then this guy over here, he wanted that color, then that means money. And these guys were just mixing blue and tan and black and tan over to the oldie. None of those colors existed. Merle didn't exist. Um, so they were breeding to Alapahas, and Catahoula was the cheapest way to go. You get a Merle Catahoula Bulldog
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
has odd colored eyes or has double blue eyes. Then the blue eyes were brought in. Well, that how my dog how he got his recessive gene was Joe LaCure, that started the Gargoyle line on the Old English Bulldogs back in the 70s. He started breeding the Somratis and to the Pit Bull. and started bringing in the tri pattern, the black and tan, blue and tan, then added the chocolate in. You bred over to an English, you bring in the chocolate color, and now you have what in the Frenchy world they try to say testable, but every color is a test. Not testable chocolate is just the B gene that comes from the English, comes from the bullies. They all carry the B gene for liver. And Trucker, that's what he was. He was chocolate, had two copies of B, testable, as they say. But I took him to dog show after dog show, and he was not um, ever denied to be shown because he was, as IOEBA stated, he was blue ribbon bred. That was the best. From their pedigree database, that's the best you can have is a blue ribbon bred. So they had to let me show everywhere, and people would give me hell and laugh and say he was a mutt, and I would get mad, but I would suck it up, and say, well, hey, look, here's his papers, here's his blue ribbon pedigree. Look at all these dogs, these magnificent dogs. When you looked at the ABKC database on his sire, it showed that he had over 507, I think 571 puppies by that male's name. So can you imagine how many out there produced were carrying that recessive gene that were smooth coated? His mom and dad were smooth coated. All his siblings were smooth coated. I got the only fluffy one in the litter. And it wasn't until he was 6 years old, I got a letter in the mail from IOEBA. Now listen, this dog's already retired. And I get a letter from them, and they said he can no longer participate in any shows. He was disqualified, and that they were unregistering him and every puppy that he had sired because they were not going to have any uh, any more of that lineage. And so I got on the phone and called them, and I said, "So you're going to do what? We're going to unregister those 66 puppies." 66 or 67 puppies and unregister him. And I said, why? He's 6 years old. And I said, I've earned all those points showing him, and he has all those offspring. And I said, some of his offspring, people are still breeding. That's okay. They're all unregistered. Listen, what a war that was. And I just wrote them a letter, and I sent a couple of my business cards, and I just wrote across his papers. I put a big X on them, and I said, get fluffed. And sent it right into the IOEBA to that Asia that works there, and the parents that work there, because they had the same bloodlines that I did, and it upset me because they knew about the fluffy the fluffy gene, but everybody's killing these puppies and getting rid of them, so nobody knew that they were fluffy.
Mm.
Joe LaCure, when he was having the fluffy gargles, man, he didn't kill them. He shipped them straight overseas. And overseas is when they started the Mammoth Bulldog, the working line of the Mammoth Bulldog. And Mammoth doesn't mean anything. No, it's not size, it's the coat. The woolly coat of the Mammoth elephant. That's why they named them Mammoth. And over
Mhm.
there it's Mammute Bulldog, and over here it's the same. Just in English, it's Mammoth.
Mhm.
And man, I started just that really made me mad, and then that just pushed me that much further to fight for the fluffy coat, because it's just like having a child. You have one that has long hair, or one that's short haired, or one that's and short and fat, and another kid that's tall and skinny. They're out of the same mom and dad. They're the same blood. You,
Mhm.
and they just have a different look. There was no reason to disqualify that dog because of coat when they were 100% blue ribbon bred, pure blood. Nothing was brought in at that time. It had already been brought in many, many years ago. And they just couldn't understand what a reset there. Nobody was a genealogist then and understood. Nobody DNA dogs. See, when I had dogs then, You didn't DNA them. You
Mm.
didn't DNA for color or health or anything. You took them to the vet and they got a wellness exam and they were on their way. I didn't start doing any color testing or health testing till probably, wow, it was probably 2015. Every French bulldog I bought, not one. I paid the very first Fluffy I bought, I paid $15,000. She had nothing except a vet record. I didn't even know anything about the health testing. Then everybody started doing all the health testing. And, my female carried Coco. There was no test for Coco at that time. UC Davis, VetGen, Animal Genetics, DDC. Nobody had the test for Coco. The Fluffy Bulldogs are my passion. I fought so hard for Trucker when I showed him. People laughing and making fun of him, because he didn't look like another old English bulldog did. It made me just push that much harder. The Fluffy Frenchies, same thing when they come out. I had a problem with them at first. They were a little bit easier though than the Old English, because everybody that started seeing the cute little Frenchies, they wanted one. The Old English, that was harder, much harder thing. It's it was funny. I would have people calling me that had Old English Bulldogs and they laughed and made fun of the fluffy coat. And then 3 or 4 years later, they calling me on the
Yeah.
phone and said, "Hey, can you look at these puppies? They're fluffy looking." And then I would laugh and I said, "Yeah, you bred two dogs that carry the recessive gene, and that's how the long hair was obtained." And they'd say, "Well, we've bred them a couple of times and they've never had one." Well, you've never bred two together that had the recessive gene. That's why. And one of them was Mr. Sullivan over in Louisiana. He had the Johnson, a lot of all the Johnson line from the old Englishes that come from the Americans. And he said, "There's no way." But then when we started doing all the research, I said, "Oh yeah, David and John Johnson, they had huge interviews with them. They used a smooth coated Saint Bernard,
Yeah.
and they didn't know. They didn't know anything about long hair. They didn't know that the smooth coated Saint Bernard carries the long hair already, and
Mm.
then they have all these dogs popping up that have long hair several years later once they're old enough to breed, and then they decide, oh, we want to do this line breeding. Then they do the line breeding, and then they have all these puppies that in the litter that are popping up with long hair. And I had a long-haired American Bulldog for a while that I did take her, and we worked on the sleeve some. She was a very, very good protection dog, but her dad was Cadillac Escalade, and he was a really magnificent working dog, and sleeve worked a lot on the sleeve. But listen, she didn't do good on the sleeve. She would bite, but she just let go. She wasn't vicious enough, and I tried forever, but she didn't have the drive.
Mm.
They have to want to do it. They have to like it and want to
Right.
do it. And she didn't. And I just gave up on her, and I bred her and had one puppy. And she was already aging out and too old. I didn't want to breed her again, but she had one beautiful puppy named Tundra. And he just got too big. He was not a good working candidate. He got the old English side and like the Saint Bernard side. He was about 95 pounds.
Mm.
It was
Wow.
really thick, monstrous head, and she was only about 55 pounds. But the male I bred her to was really a Joyful Acres and um Sullivan lines too. And he was his name was Kodiak, and he was just a big, massive male. And that puppy didn't turn out like her at all. He was very big, very massive. So that didn't work out. And then I spayed her because she was already pushing five. Well, after she had him, she was about 5.5. and I
Mm.
just went ahead and spayed her. That's probably why she only had one puppy, but they had brought her to me from Louisiana and said, "Hey, we want you to have this American Bulldog, full fluffy." I said, "Bull crap, full fluffy?" Yes. So they brought her. Oh, I was in love. And then all the American Bulldog people, I was posting her up. Oh, they were hating. And I showed them her bloodline, and they just could not believe it. But
Mm.
once you start seeing the pedigree, when it started going back to a lot of those Johnson lines, they had really beautiful uh, lines, but they were working dogs, hog dogs, dogs that would go out and work and go through the briars, and then they would come up, and your normal regular bulldog, they're not real thick skinned, and their
Mm.
coat isn't real long. And you go run them on hogs, they get ripped up. The briars just rip them apart. You add a Saint Bernard in there, it's like night and day. Their skin is thicker. Their
Mhm.
coat is short yet thicker, but they carried the long hair. They didn't know, and
Mhm.
I was intrigued with it, man. It just, the more I found out about the fluffy gene and all the bloodlines that carried it, man, I just went crazy. And then when I got the fluffy Frenchies, I thought, oh my God, here it goes again. So I learned a lot. And, uh, now it doesn't bother me anymore when people talk about, adding, adding new color and new things. I'm for it as long as they're healthy.